The October wind cut through the gaps in the corrugated metal walls like frozen knives, making Marcus pull his threadbare jacket tighter around his thin frame. He sat on an overturned crate in what used to be a maintenance shed for the old Riverside Mill, now just another forgotten structure in the industrial wasteland on the edge of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The rusted metal groaned and creaked with each gust, a sound he'd grown accustomed to over the past 8 months. Marcus was 14, though most people who saw him from a distance would have guessed younger. Malnutrition had kept him small, his clothes hanging loose on his angular body. His dark hair was long and unkempt, falling into brown eyes that had learned to watch everything while revealing nothing. 3 layers of clothing did little against the cold that seeped into his bones, but it was better than where he'd been before. Through a gap in the metal sheeting that served as his window, Marcus watched the distant lights of Millbrook flickering on as dusk settled over the town. From his vantage point on the hill, the town looked almost peaceful, almost like a place where people cared about each other. He knew better. In the 8 months since he'd run away from his last foster placement, he'd learned exactly what the people of Millbrook thought of him. The whispers started in September when Mrs. Henderson spotted him taking apples from the trees behind the old church. By October, the rumors had grown teeth. The boy living in the abandoned shack, the delinquent, the thief. Parents pulled their children closer when they saw him in town. Store owners watched him with hawk-like intensity, hands hovering near their phones. Marcus didn't blame them. Not really. He knew what he looked like. Dirty, desperate, dangerous maybe. He'd stolen food when hunger became unbearable, slipped away with discarded items from behind stores, taken what he needed to survive. But he wasn't what they thought he was. He wasn't violent. He wasn't crazy. He was just trying to stay alive, and more importantly, trying to stay free. The alternative, going back into the system, was worse than any cold night in the shack. Marcus's fingers unconsciously traced the scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from Richard Holloway, his last foster father. Richard had a smile for the social workers and fists for the kids when the doors closed. 3 foster homes in 2 years, each one a different version of the same nightmare. When Richard had raised his hand that final time, Marcus had made a decision. He'd rather take his chances alone. As darkness settled completely, Marcus pulled out his meager dinner, a dented can of beans he'd found in the donation bin behind St. Mary's Church, and half a sandwich wrapped in paper from the gas station dumpster. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't moldy either. He'd learned to be grateful for small mercies. The propane camping stove he'd salvaged flickered to life on his 3rd attempt. As the beans heated, Marcus allowed himself a moment to simply breathe, to exist without the constant vigilance that defined his waking hours. The shed was approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with a sloped roof that leaked in 3 places when it rained. He'd positioned his sleeping bag, stolen from a donation box outside the community center, in the driest corner, away from the leaks. Cardboard boxes served as makeshift furniture, a table, a chair, storage for the few possessions he'd accumulated. On the wall, barely visible in the dim light of his battery-powered lantern, hung the only photograph he'd kept, a picture of his mother, taken before the drugs took over, before the overdose that had landed him in foster care at age 11. She was smiling in the photo, genuinely smiling, and sometimes Marcus could almost remember what that version of her felt like, what safety felt like. He ate slowly, making the food last, his mind already working on tomorrow's problems. The nights were getting colder. Soon, it would be too cold to survive in the shack without better insulation, without heat that didn't depend on finding propane canisters. He had maybe 3 weeks before he'd need to figure something else out, but the thought of where that something else might be made his chest tight with anxiety. A sudden sound outside made Marcus freeze, beans halfway to his mouth. Footsteps. No. Heavier than footsteps, something moving through the brush on the far side of the shack. His heart hammered as he quietly set down the can and reached for the only weapon he had, a heavy wrench he kept near the door. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a low, pained whimper that definitely wasn't human. Marcus's grip on the wrench loosened slightly. An animal, then. Probably a raccoon or a fox. They sometimes came around looking for scraps, but the whimper came again, longer this time, filled with an agony that made something twist in Marcus's chest. That wasn't the sound of a scavenging animal. That was the sound of something hurt, something suffering. Against every instinct that had kept him alive these past months, Marcus grabbed his flashlight and moved toward the door. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to stay inside, to stay safe, to remember that every choice had consequences. But the sound came again, weaker now, and Marcus thought about all the times he'd wanted someone to care, to help, to see him as something worth saving. His hand closed around the cold metal of the door handle. The beam of Marcus's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the overgrown weeds and rusted machinery that littered the area around his shack. The temperature had dropped further, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. For a moment, he heard nothing but the wind rattling through the skeletal remains of the old mill complex. Then the whimper came again, off to his left, near the collapsed section of the fence that separated the mill property from the woods beyond. Marcus moved slowly, carefully, the wrench still clutched in his other hand, despite the fact that he was almost certain now that whatever was out here wasn't a threat. His flashlight beam swept across rusted barrels and tangles of dead blackberry bushes until it found what it was looking for. The dog lay on its side in a shallow depression between two concrete blocks, and even from 10 feet away, Marcus could see it was in bad shape. Its coat, which might once have been golden or tan, was matted with dirt and blood. One of its back legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran along its ribcage, still oozing blood. The animal's eyes, light brown and filled with pain, fixed on Marcus as he approached, but it didn't try to run. It couldn't run. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, dropping to his knees a few feet away from the injured animal. It was a medium-sized dog, maybe some kind of retriever mix, probably 2 or 3 years old if he had to guess. Its ribs showed through its matted coat. This dog had been on its own for a while, just like him. The dog's tail gave a weak, almost apologetic wag, and something in Marcus's chest cracked open. Here was another creature the world had thrown away, another life considered disposable. "It's okay," Marcus said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. "I'm not going to hurt you." He'd learned a little about animals from a book he'd found in a free library box downtown. People in Millbrook loved their free library boxes, tiny wooden structures where residents could take or leave books. It was one of the few things Marcus appreciated about the town. The book had covered basic first aid for pets, information he'd filed away without expecting to ever use it. Moving slowly, Marcus extended his hand, letting the dog smell him. Its nose was dry and hot, probably running a fever from infection. When it didn't show aggression, he gently touched its head, running his fingers through the matted fur. The dog's eyes closed briefly, leaning into the touch like it was the first kindness it had experienced in a long time. Marcus's mind raced through his options, none of them good. The dog needed a veterinarian, needed professional help that cost money he didn't have. But leaving it here to die slowly in the cold wasn't an option either. He'd heard that sound in its whimpers, the sound of something asking for mercy, for help, for one more chance at life. He knew that sound because he'd made it himself, silently, in those foster homes. "All right," he said, making a decision that he knew would complicate everything. "We're going to get you inside. This is probably going to hurt." Marcus set down the wrench and positioned himself carefully. The dog was about 40 pounds, he estimated, thin but still solid. Its injured leg made things complicated. He'd have to lift it in a way that wouldn't cause more damage. After removing his jacket and laying it on the ground, he worked it slowly underneath the dog's body, creating a makeshift stretcher. The dog whined when Marcus began to move it, a sound that cut through him like glass, but it didn't snap or try to bite. It seemed to understand somehow that he was trying to help. Marcus lifted carefully, supporting the dog's weight through the jacket, and stood slowly. His arms trembled. He wasn't particularly strong, and 8 months of inconsistent meals hadn't helped. But he managed. The walk back to the shack felt like miles instead of yards. By the time Marcus pushed through the door with his shoulder and lowered the dog onto the pile of blankets he'd arranged in the corner, sweat was running down his back despite the cold, and his arms felt like they might fall off. The dog lay still, panting heavily, its eyes never leaving Marcus's face. In the better light of the lantern, the injuries looked even worse. The gash along its ribs was deep, probably from barbed wire or broken glass. The leg was definitely broken, maybe in more than one place. There was dried blood around its mouth, and Marcus could see other cuts and scrapes hidden in its matted fur. "You got hit by a car, maybe?" Marcus spoke to the dog as he grabbed his water bottle and a relatively clean t-shirt. "Or maybe someone did this to you on purpose. People can be real monsters." He poured water into his cleanest bowl, a plastic container he'd found at the dollar store, and held it near the dog's mouth. It lapped weakly, desperately thirsty. That was a good sign, Marcus thought. Thirst meant it still wanted to live, still had fight left in it. As the dog drank, Marcus sat back on his heels and faced the impossible reality of what he'd just done. He had no money, no resources, and no way to help this animal beyond the basics. Taking it to a veterinarian would mean revealing himself, possibly ending up back in the system or worse. But looking at those trusting brown eyes, at this creature that had somehow found its way to him, Marcus knew he couldn't just let it die. The dog finished drinking and let its head rest on the blanket, still watching Marcus. Its tail gave another weak wag. "We're both in trouble now," Marcus said quietly, "but I guess we're in it together." Marcus didn't sleep that first night. Every time the dog's breathing changed, or it whimpered in pain, he was instantly alert, his hand moving to check if it was still breathing, still alive. By the time weak dawn light filtered through the gaps in the metal walls, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but the dog was still with him. In the grey morning light, Marcus could better assess the situation. The gash along the dog's ribs needed to be cleaned and bandaged. He'd done that much during the night with his limited supplies, bottled water and strips torn from an old t-shirt. It wasn't sterile, but it was the best he could manage. The wound had stopped actively bleeding, which seemed like a small victory. The leg, though, that was the real problem. Marcus had used more strips of cloth and 2 flat pieces of wood from a broken pallet to create a makeshift splint, carefully wrapping the injured limb while the dog panted and whined. He had no idea if he'd done it correctly, no idea if he was helping or making things worse. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted to the dog, who watched him with those patient, trusting eyes. "You probably figured that out already." The dog's tail moved slightly against the blanket. In the hours they'd spent together, Marcus had decided the dog was male and had started thinking of him as Chance, because that's what they both needed now, a chance. The morning brought with it a more pressing problem: food. Marcus had exactly 1 can of tuna, 3 granola bars, and half a bag of stale chips to his name. The tuna could work for Chance, but that would leave Marcus with almost nothing, and he'd been planning to make his weekly trip into town today anyway, to check dumpsters and donation boxes. But leaving Chance alone seemed wrong. The dog was weak, feverish, and couldn't move without help. What if something happened while Marcus was gone? What if he came back to find... Marcus shook the thought away. He couldn't afford to think like that. "I have to go get supplies," he told Chance, running his hand gently over the dog's head. The fever seemed slightly lower this morning, or maybe that was wishful thinking. "I'll be back as soon as I can. You just rest, okay?" He opened the can of tuna, putting half of it in the bowl for Chance and eating the other half himself along with 1 granola bar. It wasn't enough. His stomach still felt hollow, but it would have to do. Chance ate slowly, but ate everything, which Marcus took as another good sign. After making sure Chance had fresh water and was as comfortable as possible, Marcus bundled up in his layers of clothing and headed out. The walk into Millbrook took about 45 minutes, following a path through the woods that kept him out of sight from the main road. The less people saw him, the better. Millbrook on a Saturday morning was busier than Marcus preferred. Main Street was lined with old brick buildings that housed a mix of practical businesses, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a grocery store, and the newer additions that catered to tourists who sometimes drove through on their way to bigger attractions. An antique shop, a coffee place with outdoor seating that would be empty until spring, a bookstore. Marcus kept to the alleys and back streets, moving with practiced invisibility. His first stop was behind the pharmacy, where they put expired items in a separate dumpster. He'd learned that expired often meant perfectly fine, just past some arbitrary date that stores couldn't legally sell. Today's haul was decent. A package of gauze bandages with a torn wrapper, antibacterial ointment that had expired 2 months ago, and a bottle of children's pain reliever. His hands shook slightly as he stuffed them into his backpack. These weren't for him. These were for Chance. That made the stealing feel different somehow, more necessary and more guilt-inducing all at once. Behind the grocery store, he found his usual score. Day-old bread, bruised apples, a container of yogurt that was still sealed but past its sell-by date. He also found something unexpected, a small bag of dog food that had split open, maybe a pound of kibble scattered near the dumpster. Marcus gathered every piece he could find, his heart beating faster. This was exactly what Chance needed. "Hey, what are you doing back here?" Marcus's blood turned to ice. He turned slowly to find Greg Morrison, the grocery store's assistant manager, standing in the back doorway with a cigarette in hand. Greg was in his 30s, balding, with a beer gut that strained against his store polo shirt. He'd caught Marcus scavenging before, had chased him off twice. "Just leaving," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady as he shouldered his backpack. "That's my dumpster you're stealing from." Greg took a step forward, flicking ash from his cigarette. "I could call the cops, you know. Have you arrested for trespassing and theft?" Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't afford a run-in with police, couldn't afford anyone looking into who he was or where he came from. "I'm not stealing, it's trash. You threw it away." "Trash on private property." Greg's eyes narrowed. "I've seen you around town, sneaking around like a rat. How old are you, anyway? 15, 16? You should be in school, not living like some kind of animal." "I'm 18, Marcus lied, knowing he looked too young for it to be believable. "And I'm leaving now." He started to move past Greg, but the man grabbed his arm. Marcus felt panic spike through him, the touch, the control, the power dynamic that he'd sworn to never let happen again. "Maybe we should call social services instead," Greg said, his grip tightening. "Get you some help, get you off the streets. Can't be healthy, living however you're living." Marcus jerked his arm free, his breathing coming faster. "Don't touch me, and I don't need help. Kid, you're clearly, I'm not a kid." The words came out louder than Marcus intended, drawing the attention of a woman loading groceries into her car across the parking lot. "Just leave me alone." He turned and ran, ignoring Greg's shouts behind him. His backpack bounced against his spine, the precious supplies inside rattling with each step. He didn't slow down until he hit the tree line, didn't stop running until he was deep enough in the woods that he couldn't hear traffic anymore. Leaning against a tree, Marcus fought to catch his breath and calm his racing heart. His hands were shaking from exertion, from fear, from the adrenaline crash. That had been too close. If Greg called the police, if they started looking for him, if they connected him to his missing person report from 8 months ago. But he had the medical supplies. He had the dog food. He had what Chance needed. Marcus pushed off from the tree and started toward home, toward the rusty shack and the injured dog who was depending on him. For the first time in 8 months, someone needed Marcus alive, needed him to come back. It was terrifying and strangely comforting all at once. When Marcus pushed through the door of the shack, his heart still hammering from the encounter with Greg Morrison, he found Chance exactly where he'd left him. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, and those brown eyes tracked Marcus's movements across the small space. "I'm back," Marcus said, dropping to his knees beside the dog. Relief flooded through him, relief that Chance was still alive, still waiting. I got supplies, real supplies this time. He pulled out the gauze, the antibiotic ointment and the pain reliever, arranging them carefully on the overturned crate that served as his table. The dog food came next, and Marcus felt a surge of something close to pride. He could do this. He could take care of Chance properly now. After measuring out a careful dose of the children's pain reliever, he'd read the label twice to make sure he had it right for a dog Chance's size. Marcus mixed it with a little water and coaxed Chance to drink it. Then he set about changing the bandages on the dog's ribs, using the proper gauze this time, instead of torn t-shirt strips. The wound looked slightly better. The edges weren't as angry red, and there was no smell of infection yet. Marcus cleaned it carefully with bottled water and applied a thin layer of the antibiotic ointment before wrapping it with fresh gauze. Chance whined occasionally but stayed still, as if he understood this was necessary. "You're a good boy," Marcus murmured, securing the bandage. "You're doing so good." He soaked some of the dog food in water to make it easier for Chance to eat, and watched with satisfaction as the dog ate slowly but steadily. It was working. The care he was providing was actually working. But as Marcus ate his own meager lunch, one of the granola bars and an apple, reality settled back in. The encounter with Greg Morrison played on repeat in his mind. The man knew his face now, had threatened to call authorities. How long before he followed through? How long before Marcus had to pack up and move on, find somewhere else to hide? And what would happen to Chance then? The dog couldn't be moved. Not yet. The leg needed time to heal, needed weeks of rest that Marcus might not be able to provide if he had to run. A knock on the metal door made Marcus jump so violently that Chance raised his head in alarm. Marcus's mind went blank with fear. Nobody came here. Nobody even knew he lived here, not exactly. His eyes darted to the window gap, looking for an escape route, but there was only one door, and whoever was on the other side was blocking it. "Hello?" A woman's voice, tentative and soft. "Is anyone in there?" "I'm not here to cause trouble." Marcus stayed frozen, barely breathing. Maybe if he stayed quiet, she'd go away. Maybe she'd think she was wrong, that the shack was empty. "I saw you running from Morrison's market," the voice continued. "I followed you here. I just want to talk." Slowly, carefully, Marcus reached for the wrench, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. If he had to run, if he had to fight. "My name is Sarah Chen," the woman said. "I'm a veterinarian at the Millbrook Animal Clinic. I saw you had a bag of dog food in your backpack and I thought maybe you might need some help." A veterinarian. Marcus's grip on the wrench loosened slightly. His eyes moved to Chance, to the injured dog who needed professional care, who needed exactly what this woman might be able to provide. "I'm alone," Sarah Chen added. "No police, no social workers, nobody else. Just me, I promise." Marcus's mind raced through the angles, the risks, the possibilities. This could be a trap. She could be lying. But she could also be exactly what Chance needed. And wasn't that worth the risk? His hand shaking, Marcus reached for the door handle and pulled it open just a crack. The woman standing outside was in her mid-30s, Asian American, with straight black hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a practical fleece jacket. Most importantly, she was alone, just like she'd said. "Hi," she said, offering a gentle smile that didn't quite hide the concern in her eyes as she took in Marcus's appearance. "Thank you for opening the door." That took courage. Marcus said nothing, just stood in the doorway, blocking her view of the interior and keeping his body language defensive. "Listen," Sarah said, raising her hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me. But I saw you at the market, saw Greg grab your arm, and I saw you run. I used to volunteer at a youth shelter in Pittsburgh before I moved here. I recognize the signs of a kid in trouble." "I'm not a kid," Marcus said automatically. "And I'm not in trouble." "Okay," Sarah nodded slowly. "You're not a kid, and you're not in trouble. But do you have a dog in there who might be?" Marcus's jaw tightened. How had she known? "The dog food," Sarah explained, as if reading his mind. Most people don't risk stealing dog food unless they have a dog who needs it. And the gauze and antibiotic ointment you took, those aren't typically for humans. So I'm guessing you have an injured animal in there, and you're trying to help it." Behind Marcus, Chance whimpered softly. Sarah's eyes shifted toward the sound, and her expression became more focused, more professional. "Please," she said quietly. "I took an oath to help animals in need. Let me at least look at your dog. If it needs medical care that I can provide, I will. No questions asked about you, no calls to anyone. I just want to help the animal." Marcus stood at the threshold of a decision that could change everything. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to close the door, to protect his isolation. But when Chance whimpered again, softer and more pained this time, Marcus thought about those brown eyes trusting him, depending on him. "You can't tell anyone I'm here," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't tell anyone about me at all." "I won't," Sarah promised. "You have my word." Marcus stepped back and opened the door wider, letting her into his world. Sarah entered carefully, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Marcus watched her take in the makeshift living space, the sleeping bag, the propane stove, the sparse possessions of someone living on the margins. But she didn't comment on any of it. Her attention went immediately to Chance. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, kneeling beside the injured dog. "What happened to you?" She looked up at Marcus, and there was no judgment in her eyes, only professional concern. "How long has he been like this?" "I found him last night," Marcus said, still standing near the door, ready to bolt if this turned into a trap. "Outside. He couldn't move. I think his leg is broken, and he has a gash on his ribs." Sarah was already examining Chance with gentle, expert hands, checking his temperature, looking at his eyes and gums, carefully probing the injured areas. Chance, perhaps sensing help had arrived, remained calm under her touch. "You did good work with the splint," Sarah said, examining the leg, "and keeping the wound clean. That probably saved his life. He's dehydrated and malnourished, and this leg definitely needs proper setting. But he's stable. That's because of you." Something in Marcus's chest loosened slightly at her words. He'd done something right. He'd helped. "I need to take him to my clinic," Sarah continued, looking up at Marcus. "The leg needs to be x-rayed and properly set, and he needs IV fluids and antibiotics. But I promise you, I'll bring him back." "How do I know you will?" Marcus asked, hating how young and scared he sounded. Sarah sat back on her heels, considering him carefully. "You don't," she admitted. "You have to choose to trust me, which is probably the hardest thing anyone could ask of you right now. But I'll tell you this. I can see how much you care about this dog. I can see that you've been taking care of him with practically nothing. That tells me you're a good person who's trying to do the right thing, and I want to help you both." The decision to let Sarah take Chance felt like tearing off a piece of Marcus's skin. He stood in the doorway of the shack, watching as she carefully loaded the injured dog into a carrier she'd retrieved from her car. A weathered Subaru Outback parked on what remained of the old mill's access road. "I'll have him back by tonight," Sarah promised, securing the carrier in her back seat. Chance looked at Marcus through the carrier door, those brown eyes confused and worried. "My clinic is closed on weekends, so we'll have privacy. No one will see him. No one will know." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. His hands were shoved deep in his jacket pockets to hide their shaking. "Here," Sarah said, pulling out her cell phone. "What's your number? I'll text you updates." "I don't have a phone." "Right." Sarah's expression shifted. Not pity exactly, but acknowledgement of what that meant. "Okay, then I'll be back before dark. I promise you, Marcus." He hadn't told her his name. The realization hit him with cold clarity. "I heard Greg use it," she explained quickly, reading his expression. "At the market. He was yelling after you." Marcus said nothing, just wrapped his arms around himself against the cold wind that swept across the hilltop. "I'll take good care of him," Sarah said softly. Then she got in her car and drove away, taking Chance with her. The shack felt impossibly empty after they left. Marcus sat on his sleeping bag, staring at the spot where Chance had been, at the blood-stained blankets and the empty water bowl. The silence pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He'd made a mistake, a huge, stupid mistake. Sarah had seemed genuine, had seemed kind, but people could seem a lot of things before they showed their true faces. Richard Holloway had seemed nice too at first. The social workers always seemed like they cared, right up until they placed you with another family who saw you as either a paycheck or a punching bag. Marcus's mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Sarah calling animal control, who would trace Chance back to this location. Sarah calling the police to report a runaway minor living in an abandoned building. Sarah simply keeping Chance, deciding that a homeless teenager couldn't properly care for a dog, that she could provide a better life. By noon, Marcus couldn't take the waiting anymore. He left the shack and walked through the woods to a spot about a quarter-mile away where the trees thinned and he could see the town below. The Millbrook Animal Clinic was visible from here, a single-story brick building on the edge of downtown with a small parking lot. Sarah's Subaru sat in that parking lot, the only car there. She was really there. She was really alone. Those were good signs, Marcus told himself. He stayed there for hours, watching, even as the November cold seeped through his clothes and into his bones. His stomach growled. He'd given most of his food to Chance and hadn't eaten since the granola bar that morning, but he ignored it. The discomfort was familiar, manageable. Around 4 o'clock, as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Marcus saw movement at the clinic. Sarah emerged from the building carrying the carrier. Even from this distance, Marcus could see Chance's head through the carrier door. Marcus ran. He crashed through the underbrush, taking the direct route instead of his usual careful path, no longer caring about staying hidden. By the time he burst out of the woods near the mill, his lungs burned and sweat plastered his shirt to his back despite the cold. But Sarah's Subaru was already pulling up to the access road. She got out when she saw him, a smile on her face. "I was hoping you'd be watching," she said. "Come see him, he did great." Marcus approached the carrier on shaking legs. Chance was awake, alert, and when he saw Marcus, his tail started wagging. A proper white cast encased his back leg now, and fresh professional bandages covered his ribs. But most importantly, his eyes were brighter, more focused. He looked like a dog who might actually survive. "The leg was broken in 2 places," Sarah explained as Marcus opened the carrier and carefully ran his hand over Chance's head. "But it was a clean break. With proper rest and the cast, it should heal completely in about 6 to 8 weeks. I gave him IV fluids, antibiotics and pain medication. The wound on his ribs will need the bandages changed every few days, and I'm leaving you supplies for that." She pulled a shopping bag from her car, setting it on the ground. Marcus could see it was full of gauze, medical tape, antibiotic ointment, and several bottles of medication. "The orange bottle is antibiotics, 1 pill twice a day with food," Sarah instructed. "The white bottle is pain medication, 1 pill every 12 hours for the first week, then as needed. And there's a 20-pound bag of dog food in my trunk, along with proper bowls and a blanket." Marcus looked up at her, unable to process this level of kindness. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking you to." Sarah began unloading the supplies, carrying them toward the shack. "Consider it an investment in a good kid and a lucky dog." "I'm not a good kid." The words came out bitter. "Good kids don't steal. Good kids don't live in shacks." Sarah set down the bag of dog food and turned to face him fully. "Good kids do whatever they have to do to survive. That's not a moral failing, Marcus. That's resilience. You don't know anything about me." "You're right, I don't." Sarah's voice remained calm, patient. "But I know you saved that dog's life when you could have walked away. I know you're keeping yourself alive in impossible circumstances. And I know you're terrified right now that I'm going to betray you somehow, call someone, report you. I can see it in the way you're standing between me and the woods, ready to run." Marcus felt exposed, seen in a way that made his skin crawl. "I'm not going to do that," Sarah continued. "What I'm going to do is bring more supplies next weekend. Food, a better heater maybe, warmer blankets, and I'm going to check on Chance's progress. Not because I pity you, but because I believe everyone deserves help when they need it, even people who are too proud or too scared to ask for it." "Why?" Marcus asked, the question raw and desperate. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I'm nothing to you." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression distant. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, tinged with old pain. "When I was 16, I ran away from home. My father was, let's just say he wasn't a good man. I lived on the streets of Pittsburgh for 3 months before a teacher from my old school found me and convinced me to let her help. She didn't call the authorities right away. She didn't force me to go back. She just helped me, gave me space to figure things out on my own terms. Eventually, I ended up in a better foster situation, finished school, got into college. But I never forgot that teacher, or what it meant that she trusted me to make my own choices." Marcus stared at her, this stranger who suddenly seemed less strange. "I'm not saying I have all the answers for you," Sarah said, "and I'm not going to force you to accept help you don't want. But I'm here if you need me, for Chance, and for you." She pulled a business card from her pocket and held it out. "My cell number is on there. If Chance gets worse, if you need anything, or if you just want to talk, call me. There's a payphone outside the gas station on Main Street." Marcus took the card, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. The card felt impossibly small in his hand, impossibly significant. "Thank you," he managed to say, the words feeling rusty and unused, "for helping him." "You're the one who helped him," Sarah corrected gently. "I just had better tools." After Sarah left, Marcus carried Chance back inside the shack, along with all the supplies she'd left. The 20-pound bag of dog food alone represented more food security than Marcus had felt in months. The medications, the blanket, the proper bowls. It was more than he'd dared to hope for. He settled Chance in his corner, making sure the cast was properly supported, that the dog had fresh water and food. Chance ate eagerly, his appetite clearly restored, and Marcus felt something in his chest that might have been hope. "We're going to be okay," Marcus told the dog, running his hand over Chance's head. "Both of us, we're going to figure this out." Chance's tail thumped against the new blanket, and for the first time in 8 months, Marcus let himself believe that might actually be true. The week following Sarah's visit fell into an unexpected rhythm. Marcus spent his days caring for Chance, changing bandages, administering medications, and watching for signs of infection or complications. The dog's recovery was remarkable. Within 3 days, he was alert and trying to stand on his 3 good legs, his tail wagging whenever Marcus entered the shack. But as Chance improved, Marcus's situation deteriorated. The problem was visibility. Before Chance, Marcus could disappear into the background of Millbrook, slipping in and out of town like a ghost. Now he needed more supplies, dog food, fresh water for medications, materials to keep the shack cleaner. Each trip to town increased the risk of being noticed, remembered, reported. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus was behind the hardware store, salvaging some plastic sheeting from their dumpster to patch the leaks in his roof before the next rain, when he heard voices. "That kid again. I'm telling you, Jerry, he's been living rough somewhere around here for months." Marcus froze, recognizing Greg Morrison's voice immediately. "And you think he's dangerous?" A second voice, older, gravelly. "Jerry Hutchins, the hardware store owner. I don't know what he is, but it ain't right. Kid that age should be in school, should have people looking after him. Something's wrong there. I called the sheriff's office on Monday, filed a report." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Sheriff's office, filed a report. They do anything about it?" Jerry asked. "Deputy said they'd look into it, see if he matches any missing persons reports. Told me to call again if I saw him. Which I will, you can bet on that." Marcus waited until their voices faded, then abandoned the plastic sheeting and ran. His mind raced as his feet carried him through his familiar escape route. A missing persons report. Of course there would be one. The state didn't just let foster kids disappear without trying to find them, at least on paper. If the sheriff's department started looking, started comparing descriptions, his time in Millbrook was over. When he burst into the shack, Chance lifted his head from the blanket, tail wagging in greeting. The innocent trust in those brown eyes made Marcus's chest tight. "We might have to leave," Marcus said, kneeling beside the dog. His hands were shaking again. "They're looking for me. If they find us—" But Chance couldn't travel yet. The cast was still fresh, the ribs still healing. Moving him now could undo all the progress he'd made. Marcus had maybe 3 more weeks before Chance would be stable enough to transport safely. 3 weeks. Could he stay hidden for 3 more weeks? That night, Marcus barely slept. Every sound outside became a potential threat. Police cruisers, social workers, people coming to take him back. When he finally dozed off near dawn, his dreams were full of Richard Holloway's face, of locked rooms and raised fists, of running and running, but never getting away. He woke to knocking on the door. For a moment, Marcus considered not answering, but then a familiar voice called out, "Marcus, it's Sarah. I know I said I'd come on the weekend, but I had some extra supplies and wanted to check on Chance." Marcus opened the door a crack, squinting against the morning light. Sarah stood there with another shopping bag, but her smile faded when she saw his face. "What happened? You look terrible." "Didn't sleep." Marcus opened the door wider, too exhausted to maintain his usual defenses. "Morrison called the sheriff. They're looking for me." Sarah's expression tightened. "When?" "Monday. I heard him talking about it yesterday." Marcus ran a hand through his unwashed hair. "They'll figure out who I am eventually, match the description to the missing person report, and then they'll send me back." "Back where?" The question was gentle, but Marcus felt it like a physical blow. Foster care. Last placement was Richard Holloway in Clearfield. He liked to use his fists when his wife wasn't home, liked to remind us kids that nobody wanted us anyway, that we should be grateful he was willing to put up with us. Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd learned long ago that showing emotion only made things worse. "I left when he broke my ribs, figured I'd rather take my chances alone." Sarah set down the shopping bag carefully, as if sudden movements might spook him. "Did you report him? Tell your caseworker?" "I tried. After the first few times he hit me, they said I was making it up for attention, that Richard was a respected member of the community, and I was a troubled kid with a history of lying." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They weren't wrong about the lying. I'd learned to lie to survive, but that time I was telling the truth." "Oh, Marcus." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry." "Don't." Marcus's voice turned sharp. "Don't pity me. I don't need pity. I just need to figure out what to do next." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching him. Then she said, "What if you didn't have to run?" "What? What if there was another option?" Sarah spoke carefully, choosing her words. "I have a friend, David Brennan. He's a social worker, but he's one of the good ones. He works specifically with youth aging out of foster care, helping them find legitimate independent living situations. He might be able to help." "No." Marcus's response was immediate, visceral. "No social workers. They'll just send me back to Richard, or to another placement just like him. That's how it works. Not if we document what happened to you. Not if we build a case that you're not safe in traditional foster care." Sarah pulled out her phone. "David specializes in cases like yours, kids who need emancipation, kids who've been failed by the system. He could help you get legal independence, help you access resources without forcing you back into a dangerous situation." "You don't understand." Marcus's voice cracked. "People don't believe kids like me. We're the problem kids, the troublemakers. Our word doesn't mean anything. Your word means something to me." Sarah's voice was firm. "And it will mean something to David. But I can't force you to trust him. I can only tell you that staying here, staying invisible, that's not sustainable. Not with the sheriff looking for you. You need a better plan." Marcus looked at Chance, sleeping peacefully on his blanket, his casted leg stretched out. The dog had trusted him, had let Marcus help when he was vulnerable and hurt. Maybe it was time for Marcus to try trusting someone too. "If I meet with this David guy," Marcus said slowly, "and I don't like him, or I think he's going to send me back, I'm gone. I'll take chance and disappear before anyone can stop me." "Okay," Sarah agreed. "That's fair, but give him a chance. Give yourself a chance at something better than this." She gestured around the shack, the rusty walls, the leaking roof, the space heater that barely kept the cold at bay. It was survival, but it wasn't living. Marcus knew that. He'd known it for months. "When?" he asked. "I'll call him today, set something up for this weekend, somewhere neutral, somewhere you'll feel safe." Sarah picked up the shopping bag again. "In the meantime, I brought you real food. Sandwich stuff, fruit, a rotisserie chicken, and more dog food, plus a toy for Chance. He's recovering well enough now that he needs mental stimulation." The kindness was almost harder to bear than the cold nights and empty stomach had been. Marcus had built his survival around expecting nothing from anyone, and Sarah kept dismantling that foundation piece by piece. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked again, because he still didn't understand. "Because someone did it for me once," Sarah said simply, "and because you deserve better than what you've gotten so far. Both of you do." After she left, Marcus sat beside Chance and pulled out the sandwich Sarah had made. Turkey, cheese, lettuce, tomato on fresh bread. It was the kind of simple meal that most people took for granted, and Marcus had to blink back tears as he took the first bite. Chance nudged his hand with his nose, and Marcus gave him a piece of turkey. "Things might get better," Marcus told the dog, "or they might get worse, but we're in this together now, right? Whatever happens." Chance's tail thumped agreement, and Marcus allowed himself the dangerous luxury of hope. Saturday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late November in Pennsylvania. Marcus spent the morning anxiously checking the time on the old wind-up clock he'd found at a yard sale, watching the minutes crawl toward noon. That was when Sarah had arranged for him to meet David Brennan at Riverside Park, a public space where Marcus could leave quickly if he needed to. Marcus had bathed as well as he could with bottled water and a rag, changed into his cleanest clothes, and even attempted to comb his hair. Looking at his reflection in the fragment of mirror he'd salvaged months ago, he barely recognized himself. When had he gotten so thin? When had his eyes developed that haunted, hunted look? "Wish me luck," he told Chance, who was dozing comfortably, his cast propped on a folded blanket. The dog's recovery continued to exceed expectations. He was eating well, the wound on his ribs was healing cleanly, and he'd even started putting a little weight on his good legs. The walk to Riverside Park took 20 minutes. Marcus arrived early, positioning himself near the playground, where he'd have a clear view of anyone approaching and multiple exit routes. The park was moderately busy, with families enjoying the unexpectedly pleasant weather. Children played on the swings, while parents watched from benches, their faces content and untroubled. Marcus wondered what it felt like to be that carefree. Sarah arrived at exactly noon, accompanied by a man Marcus assumed was David Brennan. He was in his early 40s, black, with close-cropped hair going grey at the temples, and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. He wore jeans and a sweater rather than the formal attire Marcus associated with social workers, and his body language was relaxed, non-threatening. "Marcus," Sarah greeted him with a warm smile, "this is David. David, this is the young man I told you about." David extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and just nodded instead. "It's good to meet you, Marcus. Sarah's told me a little about your situation. I want you to know right up front. I'm here to listen, not to force anything. You're in control of this conversation." They sat at a picnic table away from the main playground area. Sarah pulled out a thermos of hot chocolate and some sandwiches, setting them on the table like this was just a casual meeting between friends. Marcus's stomach growled, but he ignored it, too nervous to eat. "So," David said, folding his hands on the table, "Sarah mentioned you've been on your own for about 8 months, that you left your last foster placement due to abuse." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice yet. "That takes incredible courage," David continued, "but it also puts you in a vulnerable position legally and practically. I'm guessing you're 14, maybe 15. 14, Marcus admitted quietly. 15 in February. And your last placement was with Richard Holloway in Clearfield? The name made Marcus's shoulders tense. "How did you know?" I called in a favor, checked the missing person reports for boys your age in central Pennsylvania. There's only one from Clearfield. Marcus Rivera, reported missing by the Clearfield County Department of Social Services on March 15th of this year. David's expression was grave. The report notes that you have a history of behavioral issues and running away from placements. That's what they always say. Marcus's voice was bitter. Troubled kid. Behavioral issues. Lying for attention. Makes it easier to ignore when we tell the truth about what's happening to us. I know. David's voice carried a weight that suggested he really did know. I've been a social worker for 19 years, Marcus. I've seen every side of the system. The good, the bad, and the absolutely inexcusable. I've seen kids like you fall through the cracks because caseworkers are overworked, because foster parents are skilled at hiding abuse, because the system is fundamentally broken in ways that hurt the most vulnerable people it's supposed to protect. Marcus looked up, meeting David's eyes for the first time. There was no judgment there, no skepticism, just acknowledgement. But I've also seen kids find their way out, David continued. I've helped teenagers get emancipated, helped them access resources and support that allow them to build independent lives safely and legally. That's what I want to help you do, if you're willing to work with me. What does that actually mean? Marcus asked. Emancipation? It means you'd be legally recognized as an adult, responsible for yourself. You'd be able to sign leases, open bank accounts, make your own decisions without needing a guardian. But it's not easy to get. You have to prove to a judge that you're capable of supporting yourself, that you have a plan for housing and income, and that emancipation is in your best interest. I don't have any of those things. Not yet, David agreed. But that's where I come in. I can help you access programs for homeless youth, transitional housing, job training, educational support. There's a group home in Clearfield specifically for older teens working toward independence. It's not foster care. It's more like supervised independent living. You'd have your own room, support staff available, but not controlling your every move, and access to services that would help you build toward emancipation. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. I can't go back to Clearfield, not with Richard there. You wouldn't have contact with Richard, David said firmly. Part of my involvement would be documenting the abuse you experienced and ensuring that you're protected from any contact with him. I'd also be advocating for an investigation into his home, because if he hurt you, chances are he's hurt other kids too. The thought of Richard facing consequences for what he'd done was almost too surreal to process. In Marcus's experience, people like Richard didn't face consequences. They smiled at social workers and church groups, while kids like Marcus nursed their bruises in silence. I know this is a lot to take in, Sarah said gently, speaking for the first time since introductions. And nobody's asking you to decide right now. But David is offering you a path forward that doesn't involve running, doesn't involve living in fear, a chance to build something real. What about chance? Marcus asked. The question tumbled out before he could stop it. The dog Sarah's been helping me with. I can't leave him, I won't. David and Sarah exchanged a look. The group home doesn't allow pets, David admitted. But we could work something out. Maybe Sarah could foster Chance temporarily while you get settled, until you're in a position to care for him yourself. No, Marcus's response was immediate. He's my dog, my responsibility. I found him. I took care of him when nobody else would. I'm not abandoning him. That's not what we're suggesting, David started. It doesn't matter what you call it. Marcus stood up, his hands clenched into fists. Everyone always has reasons why things can't work, why I have to give up something, why I have to compromise. Well, I'm done compromising. Chance stays with me or I stay on my own. He turned to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped him. Wait. She stood up too, her expression thoughtful. What if there was another option? What if Chance could come with you? Sarah, David said quietly, a warning in his tone. Hear me out. Sarah looked at David, then back at Marcus. What if Marcus stayed with me temporarily, just until we can get the emancipation process moving and find him appropriate long-term housing? I have a spare bedroom, space for a recovering dog, And as a veterinarian, I can provide the medical care Chance still needs. It would be a temporary fostering situation, but unofficial. Marcus wouldn't be in the system, wouldn't be at risk of being sent back to a dangerous placement. That's not protocol, David said, though his tone was more considering than dismissive. Protocol hasn't been working for kids like Marcus. Sarah's voice was firm. You said it yourself. The system is broken. Sometimes we need to work around it to actually help people. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he sighed. If I were to support this arrangement, and I'm not saying I am yet, it would have to be done carefully. Background checks, home visits, clear documentation that Marcus is there voluntarily and can leave at any time. It couldn't look like you're harboring a runaway, because that would create legal problems for everyone. I understand, Sarah said. David turned to Marcus. And you would have to commit to working with me on building a case for emancipation. That means documentation, therapy, to process the trauma you've experienced, maybe even testifying about the abuse if it comes to that. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Are you willing to do that? Marcus looked between them. These two adults who were offering him something he'd stopped believing existed. A chance. Not a guarantee, not a fix for everything wrong in his life, but a genuine opportunity to build something better. If I say yes, Marcus asked carefully, and then I don't like how things are going, can I leave, or do I get trapped? You can leave, David said firmly. I won't lie to you, Marcus. If you run again, we'll have to report it. But if you're working with us in good faith, and something isn't working, we'll figure out another solution together. This isn't about trapping you. It's about giving you support and resources so you don't have to survive alone anymore. Marcus thought about the shack, about cold nights and empty stomachs, about the constant fear of being discovered. He thought about Chance, recovering but still needing care. And he thought about Sarah's words from their first meeting. Everyone deserves help when they need it. Okay, he said, the word barely above a whisper. Then louder, okay, I'll try it. But Chance comes with me, and if Richard Holloway comes anywhere near me, all bets are off. Deal, Sarah said, her smile wide and genuine. David extended his hand again, and this time Marcus shook it. Sarah's house was nothing like what Marcus had imagined. It was a small ranch-style home on the outskirts of Millbrook, with a fenced backyard and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. Inside, it was warm and cluttered in a comfortable way. Books stacked on shelves, framed photos of Sarah with various dogs, a worn couch that looked perfect for sinking into. The spare bedroom is back here, Sarah said, leading Marcus through the house while carrying the bag containing his few possessions. Chance limped along beside Marcus, his cast clicking against the hardwood floors, tail wagging as he explored these new surroundings. The bedroom was small but clean, with a window overlooking the backyard, a full-size bed with a blue comforter, and a dresser that looked like it had been recently emptied. I cleared out some space for your clothes, Sarah said, then paused. We should probably get you some new clothes and toiletries. We can make a list of what you need. Marcus stood in the doorway, unable to quite process that this space was for him. Where do you want Chance to sleep? Wherever you want, Sarah said. He can stay in here with you, or there's a dog bed in the living room. Your choice. Your choice. Those words felt foreign, almost dangerous. Choices meant responsibility, meant the possibility of choosing wrong and facing consequences. With me, Marcus decided, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. This is your space now, Marcus. Sarah set his bag on the bed. I know this is a big adjustment. We can take it slow, figure things out as we go, but there are a few house rules we should discuss. Marcus tensed, waiting for the catch, for the impossible expectations or the hidden conditions. 1, Sarah continued, you tell me if something isn't working or if you're uncomfortable. Communication is essential. 2, we share cooking and cleaning responsibilities. I'm not your maid, and you're not my servant. We're housemates working together. 3, you continue working with David on the emancipation process. That's non-negotiable. And 4, we both respect each other's privacy and space. That's it? Marcus asked suspiciously. No curfew, no restrictions, no consequences for breaking rules. Oh, there will probably be more rules as we figure out what works for us, Sarah said with a slight smile. But I'm not interested in controlling you, Marcus. I'm interested in providing a stable, safe place for you to figure out who you want to be and what kind of life you want to build. That requires trust on both sides, and trust takes time. The first few days were the hardest. Marcus kept expecting the other shoe to drop, kept waiting for Sarah to reveal herself as just another adult with good intentions and bad follow-through. He barely slept that first night, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed with Chance snoring softly beside him, listening to every creak and footstep in the house. But Sarah was consistent. She made breakfast each morning and invited Marcus to join her without making it mandatory. She went to work at the clinic and came home when she said she would. She asked Marcus questions about his preferences, what he liked to eat, what he wanted to do with his time, and actually listened to his answers. On the third day, David came by for their first official meeting. They sat in Sarah's living room, and David pulled out a thick folder of paperwork. "This is the beginning of building your case for emancipation," David explained. "We need to document everything, your history in foster care, the abuse you experienced, your time living independently, your current situation. It's going to bring up difficult memories." "I can handle it," Marcus said, though his hands were shaking slightly. They started with the basics, dates, placements, names of caseworkers and foster parents. But then they moved into harder territory. Specific incidents of abuse, injuries sustained, times Marcus had tried to report what was happening and been ignored or dismissed. By the time David left 2 hours later, Marcus felt exhausted and raw, like someone had scraped away his protective layers and left him exposed. Sarah brought him hot chocolate and sat beside him on the couch, not saying anything, just being present. "Thank you," Marcus said finally, "for letting me do this here. For being here." "Always," Sarah replied simply. The following week, Sarah took Marcus shopping, a surreal experience after months of scavenging and stealing. He stood in the clothing section of Target, overwhelmed by the choices, by the fact that he could pick what he wanted rather than taking whatever was available. "Get whatever you need," Sarah encouraged. "Warm clothes, comfortable clothes, whatever makes you feel good." Marcus selected items carefully, choosing practical over fashionable, always conscious of the cost, even though Sarah had told him not to worry about it. But she seemed to understand, didn't push him to take more than he was comfortable with. At the grocery store, Sarah handed him the cart. "Pick out some things you like to eat. We'll stock up so you don't have to worry about food." Marcus walked slowly through the aisles, putting items in the cart almost reverently. Fresh fruit, real bread, cereal, things he'd taken for granted before his mother died, before foster care, before survival became his only goal. Chance continued to improve. The cast came off after 6 weeks, right before Christmas, and the vet Sarah had consulted confirmed that the leg had healed perfectly. Chance ran around Sarah's backyard with pure joy, finally able to move freely again, and Marcus felt his own heart lighten watching him. David kept working on the emancipation case. There were meetings with lawyers, therapy sessions to document the trauma Marcus had experienced, paperwork that seemed endless. It was exhausting and triggering and necessary. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for February," David told Marcus in late January, "right after your 15th birthday. The judge will review your case, hear testimony, and decide if emancipation is appropriate." "What are the chances?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, I think they're good. You've demonstrated maturity and resilience. You've been stable with Sarah for 2 months now. You're engaged in therapy and working on your GED. You've shown that you can make responsible choices, but nothing is guaranteed." Marcus nodded, trying to manage his expectations while hoping for the best. His 15th birthday fell on a Thursday. Marcus woke that morning to the smell of pancakes and found Sarah in the kitchen with a small cake decorated with 15 candles. "Happy birthday," she said warmly. "I know you're probably not big on celebrations, but everyone deserves to have their birthday acknowledged." They ate pancakes and cake for breakfast, and Chance got extra treats. It was simple and perfect, and Marcus felt something in his chest that might have been happiness. That afternoon, David called with news. "Richard Holloway is being investigated," he said without preamble. "Based on your testimony and evidence we gathered, the state is reviewing his foster license. 2 other former foster children have come forward with similar allegations. You did that, Marcus. Your courage made it possible for other kids to speak up." Marcus sat down heavily on the couch, processing this information. Richard might actually face consequences. Other kids might be protected from experiencing what Marcus had endured. "There's more," David continued. "The preliminary hearing went better than expected. The judge was impressed with your progress and your support system. She's granting you provisional emancipation, effective immediately. You'll have a final review in 6 months to confirm everything is still stable. But Marcus, you did it. You're legally independent." The words didn't feel real at first. Marcus looked around Sarah's living room, at Chance sleeping in a sunbeam, at the life he'd somehow managed to build from nothing. "What happens now?" he asked David. "Now you keep doing what you're doing, keep working on your GED, maybe start thinking about what comes next, job training, college, whatever you want your future to look like. The world is opening up for you." After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence for a long time. Sarah came home from the clinic and found him there, tears streaming down his face. "Hey," she said gently, sitting beside him. "What happened?" "I got emancipation," Marcus said, his voice breaking, "and Richard's being investigated, and I can't believe this is real, that things actually got better." Sarah pulled him into a hug, and Marcus let himself cry for the scared 14-year-old who'd run away with nothing, for Chance, who'd been just as broken and lost, for all the kids still trapped in situations like the ones he'd escaped. But he also cried because he'd survived. Against all odds, despite a system designed to fail him, with the help of people who'd chosen to care, he'd survived and built something worth living for. 3 months later, Marcus enrolled in the local community college's summer program. He'd earned his GED in May, scoring high enough to qualify for scholarships. Sarah had offered to let him stay as long as he needed, but Marcus was already looking at transitional housing programs, at building his independence the right way. Chance had filled out, his golden coat shiny and healthy, the limp from his old injury barely noticeable, unless he overdid it at the dog park. He'd become Marcus's constant companion, a reminder that broken things could heal if given the chance. One evening in late June, Marcus and Sarah sat on her back porch, watching Chance chase fireflies in the yard. The Pennsylvania summer stretched out before them, warm and full of possibility. "I'm starting work at the hardware store next week," Marcus said. Jerry Hutchins had offered him a part-time job after David had vouched for him. "Minimum wage, but it's a start." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "You've come so far, Marcus." "We both have." Marcus looked at her, this woman who'd taken a chance on a scared kid and his injured dog. "Thank you for everything, for seeing past what I looked like and what people said about me, for giving us a chance." "You gave yourself a chance," Sarah corrected gently. "I just provided some support along the way. Everything else, the courage, the resilience, the choice to trust again, that was all you." Marcus turned back to watch Chance playing, thinking about the rusty shack, the cold nights, the fear that had defined his existence for so long. That life seemed almost like it belonged to someone else now, a story about a boy who'd been lost but found his way home. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was Marcus Rivera, 15 years old and legally independent, with a future stretching out before him, full of choices he got to make for himself. He had people who cared about him, a dog who loved him unconditionally, and most importantly, he had hope. The town had feared him once, had seen him as a threat, as something to be avoided and reported. Now they were beginning to see him as he actually was. A kid who'd survived impossible circumstances and came out the other side stronger for it. Chance bounded back to the porch, dropping a tennis ball at Marcus's feet with an expectant look. Marcus threw it, watching the dog race after it with pure joy, and allowed himself to smile. This was healing. This was home. This was what happened when someone chose to help instead of judge, to see potential instead of problems, to offer a hand instead of turning away. And it all started because a wounded dog appeared, and a frightened boy chose compassion over fear. If you've made it this far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave us a comment, letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating content like this. Thank you for being here with us.